It's not complicated. It's all boiling down to what the customer needs and understanding it from their perspective.
All right, what up, leaders? My name is Darius, your host of Influence to Impact show. Today's guest sold his business for $30 million at the age of 33. And this was a business that he scaled up from $0 all the way to Singapore's #1 hosting provider with over 35,000 clients and a team of 150. And that company is Vodien. In 2017, Vodien got acquired in the biggest deal there was in Southeast Asia for pure play hosting company. And his company's acquisition shook up his whole identity, especially since the business has been a part of him for 17 years. So ever since, he have gave back by making a donation to create a scholarship fund for his alma mater with all the amount of cash that he has. And he also mentored students and spoke at various events about entrepreneurship and his journey as well. Now, due to this whole event as well, he also got dropped off from materialism after owning a Lamborghini itself, which started his journey in minimalism. And eventually he sold off all his possessions, and after traveling full-time for a few years, he has now spent his past 2 years coaching other entrepreneurs on how to super scale like him through his 5E Scale Engine framework. So introducing to you today's guest, Alvin Po. Welcome to the show, Alvin.
Hey, good to be here.
All right, so let's jump in right into the first question itself. What do you think is the definition of being a leader in your business, especially when you have 150 people in your team back then?
Wow. I see leadership as a responsibility, man. So especially with a growing group of people, the role of a leader is ever more important, right? And we look at I like looking at alternative cases. So let's say you have a good leader, right? What's the alternative case like if the good leader isn't around? In that case, usually there's going to be chaos, nothing gets done, nobody knows what's going on. And that's what will happen if you don't be a good leader. And so I see leadership as really changing that default messy case into something that's not, into something that's more organized, more intentional, more productive. That's what I think being a good leader is in business, actually in everything.
Now it's interesting because I know you have been recently writing up your whole super scaling book, which is gonna launch on 7th July. Am I right?
Yeah, 7/7.
And so let's talk about all the systems that you mentioned in the books, because there are many amazing systems oriented strategies that you're actually teaching us through the book. Now, what's very fascinating is how you keep on talking about systems again and again, kind of like how it runs your whole life. So it's very interesting. I just want to bring back to like maybe when you're younger or something, like how did you switch up to such a character that's so focused on systems, like to the point that everything in life is about systems? Like if you read the book, guys, which I highly recommend you go and read, even his mindset part has to do with systems. So it's very interesting the way that you think about it, like how everything is about systems. So what do you think, like in the past, was it that you think or do that resulted in your business being, or you yourself in your life being so system oriented?
That's really difficult to answer, because to me that's my norm. That's like who I am, like all the time. And that's one of the problems when I was considering getting into this whole mentoring and coaching space. I didn't know what my value was. I didn't know what kind of value I would bring to people. I didn't know that my strengths lay in how systematic I was and how I thought about things. It was only recent, like in the last 1 or 2 years, that I discovered this about myself. So I don't really know what point it is in my life that caused me to be this way. I guess this is like my natural strength. But I know that as a person, not just in business, but in all aspects of my life, that I like looking at things to be systematic, to be sustainable, to be long-term. I don't like the stuff that happens once and then that's it, right? It's like a fluke, or it's like this really good period of like great growth, and then after that there's nothing at all. I don't see that being very sustainable. I don't see that being like life changing. I like looking at things that are maybe small, incremental, but compounds, and over the long term you get like massive oversized results, and they are there to stay. They are permanent. So that's the kind of thing that I like, and I can see only systems allowing you to do that, not anything else. So I guess even when I was growing up, like I was like rebellious and all that, right? I guess I saw systems as like a way to get free. Like people might think that is so systems. People think it's very, very disciplined. It's a very,
Yeah,
very
yeah.
like fixed structure, right? But within that fixed structure, you can really be free. What do I mean? Like, so let's say a daily routine, right? If in a daily routine you get everything done, you hydrate, you get your workout, you meditate, or do whatever you need to do in a day, right? And you spend like that 3 hours or whatever doing all of that, guess what? The rest of the day, you are literally free to do whatever you want. I think that's the way to get freedom.
That's a very interesting perspective that you brought by, because people who are rebels usually do what's off the norm, which means you don't stick to the system, you don't stick to like the rules. And sometimes I think people see systems as like something very rigid, because I know like for my team as well, sometimes I have to reinforce onto like, oh, okay, let's follow systems. And sometimes I feel like, is it maybe a bit too rigid for them to go like, oh, okay, you follow systems again and again. But it's very interesting they brought in the perspective that following the system and going through the system itself allows you to free up more time and to create that time to be even more free than ever itself. So then my question is like, to people who aren't very system oriented like you, right? People who can't really resonate with systems, because I resonate a lot with systems, that's why I love the book itself. But like let's say for some of my team members, they're not exactly very systematic people. How do you go about, inculcating into the culture of like, let's follow systems and let's build on these systems itself?
Yeah. So the reason why people don't feel like it's something that they can do is probably because they don't feel like their environment supports it. So I'm trying to think of examples in like normal life, right? That can be a good mirror of this. But I would say that if every single time in your business you bring out the need for systems, that you bring out the need to actually get things systemized, people will start having that mindset. Like it's like if you can't fight it, you can't fight them, join them, right? So that's what happens, right? If every single meeting or every single discussion, you bring out the fact that you need systems, have you done your systems? Have you done this? Have you done that? It becomes something that everybody needs to do. And the reason why they need to do it is not because the leader or the boss or the management wants everybody to do it just because. That's not going to work. People are just going to rebel and like not do things, right?
Yeah.
But if there's a bigger reason, there's a purpose behind it, there's an intent behind it, then it becomes something that people can subscribe to. If you as a creative person, right, want to go on a vacation, if you want to take a break and take leave and not be disturbed by phone calls in the office, then you better make sure there'll be systems in place, because only then can your team member or your the person that's replacing you or helping you cover for your leave, for you and your leave, only then can they figure out what needs to be done without calling you all the time, without emailing you all the time. So the way I see it, systems help you. They don't actually like cause you pain or anything like that. And once you create an environment that everybody can actually like get things done in the system, and whether it's documentation or making sure processes are followed, it's better for everyone.
All right, man, I think those are some awesome tips. Gonna start talking about systems to my team every single gonna start talking to my team about systems every single week now. Now in the book, you talk a lot about also providing the service that your customer needs. And I know back then in Vodien, you cared a lot for your customers, especially when the problem that you were solving was customer service, right? And so how can businesses constantly make sure that they are on the right path of placing their customers at the front? Because I've seen, not going to quote businesses out there, but there are some businesses that think that they are making the right step for the customer, but then the customer doesn't feel that way. And how do we make sure that, we're constantly on that path itself? Because sometimes we might step out of that line itself.
Yeah, so I think one of the problems that businesses face as they grow is that the business owner, the entrepreneur who first started the business, gets further and further distant away from the actual customer. That happened with me as well. It was just me and my co-founder. We were like literally the people talking to the customer. So we're definitely getting like first-hand experience, and we knew for sure what the problem were, what kind of pain points the customers have, whether or not they were getting a good experience. All those things were utterly clear to us. When we started growing though and getting more people on board and our team started expanding, people started taking over functions like customer support, sales, what have you. And as business owners, we start becoming like further and further, more and more distant away from the customer. So much so that sometimes you don't even get to interact with the customer at all. And that's quite dangerous, because then you don't know what the true customer pains are, what the true customer problems are, and you can't create products, services, or solutions for that. And even if you do, sometimes it might be a case of putting the horse before the cart, or the cart before the horse, right? Where you're actually creating a solution and then looking for a problem. You're not looking at a problem and then creating a solution for that. So I think one of the things that I talk about in the book is having a really, really good information flow within the company, not just downwards, but upwards as well. We basically want a clear up and down information flow so that we can actually understand what the hell is going on, not just to our customers, but in different departments, up and down the hierarchy in the company as well. And then with that, you can really get to have a good pulse, a check on the pulse of the business, of the customer, of the problems that you're solving, the value that you're creating, whether or not it's working, whether or not people appreciate it, all of that.
That's interesting you talk about the up-down flow of communication itself. And since we're on the topic of communication, right, I think sometimes like we as leaders, like what you say in the book, we become bottlenecks. I think that's one of the things that I kind of relate to at one point of time, because I felt like, oh crap, I'm the one that's not really moving forward. Now, for leaders that sometimes where they drop the ball occasionally, or they didn't do something that well itself. So how do we go about, dealing with this in terms of communications with our team in some areas that we screw up in?
Bottlenecks in the sense that we don't communicate, or like
so let's take the example of maybe we didn't communicate that well, then because of that we become the bottleneck itself. And how do we deal with that then?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I have this book is because there are actually 5 principles to scaling up a business. One of the principles, and these principles are in order, by the way. The very first principle is all about the entrepreneur, the mindset of the entrepreneur. Sometimes things happen not because we sometimes are aware of it, or not because sometimes we even know that it was caused by ourselves. Because what happens is that we have limiting beliefs. We have frames of mind that stop us from doing things or prevent us from doing things. One of it could be the mindset that you don't want to let go of tasks. You want to hold on to work because you don't trust people.
Yeah, perfectionist.
yeah, right. And that could be a cause of a bottleneck as well. And maybe you didn't clarify expectations, or you assume that people have the same level of experience as you, and therefore you're always constantly being disappointed or dejected or angry at like your team members' performance or productivity, and that causes a lot of friction, right? So these are all causes of bottlenecks, and that's what I cover in the first principle, the principle called evolve. It really covers like why, what makes us entrepreneurs, what makes us capable to run businesses that are like 6, 7, 8, 9 figures. Because if we want to run the businesses of that size, we've got to be 8, 9 figure entrepreneurs ourselves, right? Our mindset, our capabilities have to match that of our business. And so that's why it's one of the first principles that I cover before even looking at the others that affect the business itself.
Awesome, man. And since you're on that whole thing about, the identity, because what you're saying is like the identity has to match with where you want to go. And you talk heavily about vision in your book, especially getting very clear on where to go so you can direct your team together with it, and everyone is on the common mission, common man working towards a common goal. Right? I think that tons of people, including some of my clients as well, sometimes like they struggle with having that really, really clear, or I would say more like having wanting a perfect vision in that state, right? And so did you get very clear of your vision when you first started your Vodien, or was it something you progress on? And how did you really progress the vision? Because I'm sure it's not like, oh, one day suddenly all the the whole vision just got painted out in your mind itself, but it's more like a progress. So how did it start, and then how did you progress and tweak along that way?
Yeah, it was definitely a very iterative process that took many, many months, I think even years. So when we first started, my co-founder and I, we knew we wanted to set up a business. And at the point of time, we were 17-year-old kids. And all that we wanted was pocket money, right? And it was either going to doing a part-time job or doing this like freelance business that we had. And so that was the only reason why we started. But as the business grew, we realized that what we were doing wasn't just making money, it was actually serving clients. And that serving of clients, fixing their problems, solving their needs, that actually really showed us the importance of what we were doing. It was no longer just profits. It was more of duty and responsibility. Because all these people that we were serving were actually trusting and relying upon us. So I think knowing that allowed us to really evolve the vision that we had. At the start, all that we wanted to do is make sure that we were there for the customers, provide great customer support, but that slowly evolved. Support was just one of the pillars that we needed. In fact, if you think about it, if the company is really very good, you probably wouldn't make use of customer support, right? So we wanted to focus on other things that will affect the customers directly. Things like speed, right? How fast and what the performance of your accounts are. We want to look at stability, making sure that your websites and emails don't go down, right? And we want to look at security as well. People always get hacked, data gets lost. We want to make sure that doesn't happen, or if that happens, that there's a backup that can be retrieved really quickly. So with all these things in place, we now could have this really comprehensive way of taking care of our customers and providing them with a service that they absolutely loved. So that vision that we had really evolved over time, like I said, months or years, to actually encompass all these points. And then we were super clear on what we needed to do. Everything that we did in the company would address one or more of these pillars. And that's how we knew that we were on the right track. So that's why the vision is so important to me. It's like if you're driving a car and nobody in the car knows where you're going, you're going to have a big problem. You're going to have fights, you're going to have conflict, you're going to have a lot of disagreements, you're going to have a lot of questions. So I'd rather have everybody very clear about the vision, absolutely certain of where they're going, even better if they know how they're going and where they're at and all that kind of stuff, right? Be very transparent, be very, very clear on communication. Yeah, and those are the things that I cover in the book.
Yeah, I think if those who want to really detail down more of their vision itself can continue reading the book. Then I got a question, right? Because based on vision itself, now it's very clear through this whole interview itself that you're very obsessed with serving your customers at a higher level, right? Even for your vision that you talked just now, there was no one pillar that was not about the customer itself. Every single one of it was all about the customer. Now, just want to discuss a little bit more about how you think about or why you come up with such a vision in the first place. So what are some questions that you constantly think and ask yourself that will really deepen the impact of our clients? Because I think a lot of us, we constantly think, okay, how can we help our clients more? How can we help our clients more? And then we think and think and think. Then we realize that, okay, we create something for them. Then we realize, oh wait, someone else already has it, right? And a lot of us have this test and trial error. But what is it that got you to identify these areas like in a way quicker than what I would say the rest of the competitors in the market? Because you guys became one of the biggest itself.
Yeah, well, it's not complicated. It's all boiling down to what the customer needs and understanding it from their perspective, having that empathy to look at things from a customer's point of view. We don't want to again be a business that's putting the cart before the horse. We want to just make sure that whatever we do is grounded in reality, is grounded in fundamentals. It's basically stuff that customers are asking for or are needing, right? Henry Ford was a great example. If he just asked the customer what do you want, right? The customer would just ask for a faster horse.
Yeah.
Right. But that's not the point. He understood really what their pain points were, their problems were, which was to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. And because of that, he could create a car. And I think that's something that entrepreneurs need to think about. Like sometimes what you need to understand what the customer's true pain point is, and then create something out of it. I know that it's not like a clear-cut framework, but I think entrepreneurs just need to just sit down and really consider from their customer's point of view, what is the solution or what is the true service that they are needing.
Yeah, I think it's something that we kind of face also sometimes with like people that come to us, and then we go like, okay, shouldn't be looking at your competitor solution, but just looking at the market and the audience itself first, right? Because it's all about prioritizing our clients first, and like what you say, understanding what's your problem and then where they want to go. Because at the end of the day, if we can get a much easier or faster or something that no one has ever seen that allows them to go from A to B, then it will still work, right? It's like just now you gave a very brilliant example of Henry Ford about if he asked them, then people would just say they want a faster horse. But that's the reason why he created the car in the first place. So talking about leaders and talking about scaling in this whole picture itself, you went through a ton of awesome strategies and insights in the book. In fact, a lot of strategies in the book itself, and detailed down really each step that people actually take. Now, let's say if someone were to come to you and they say that, hey, Alvin, I want to scale. Right? What are the first few things that you would actually look at? Right? I mean, out of all the strategies that you actually talk about in the book, but let's say in a real life example, if someone come to you and they say, hey, let's say it's a coaching or consulting business, and they say, I want to scale. What's the first few things that you will actually look at in the business?
One of the frameworks that I use heavily in everything that I do is a results first framework. I use the waterfall of intent to do this. The waterfall intent basically starts from a result first approach. Like, what is it that you're trying to do? If you're saying that you're trying to scale, then that's the end result, right? I want to scale. And then from there, we can understand the steps that can get you there. The problem is most of the time when people say I want to scale, that's not really the root cause. Okay, so what I use is the 5 whys. The 5 whys is actually really good for everything, actually finding out the root cause. Even like what we talked about, the understanding what the customer's true pain point is can be found using the 5 whys. And the 5 whys isn't something that I came up with. It's something that Toyota came up with. It's based on their Kaizen methodology, understanding the root cause of a problem before you go tackle it. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're running a business right now, you have a team of people, and like maybe that team of people are a team of developers, and they're supposed to deliver a project. Now, for some reason, the project has been late, right? It's delivered late. And then you find out it's because of this new developer that did not do his job or caused the project to be late, right? Now that it can be an end result in itself. And then you penalize this new developer who was late. That might not solve the problem. That might not be the root cause. The 5 why methodology asks a series of 5 whys to get to the root cause of the problem. So when you have this scenario, maybe you can ask the first why. The first why will probably lead you to, the first why is basically why was the new developer late, right? And that could get you to discover the fact that perhaps he didn't know how to work the systems in the company, right? And if that's the case, then maybe you could penalize him for not spending enough time training or not spending enough time going through the systems. But if you ask the next why, you realize that he couldn't do that because maybe he had the time to do it, but maybe the training material was incomplete, right? And then from there, maybe you could go penalize the guy that created the training material. But if you ask the next why again, maybe you realize that there was nobody assigned to it. Or maybe you realize that the person who was assigned to it left the company and there was no replacement, right? So every step that you ask that why leads you to a deeper and deeper understanding of what causes the problem. And you see, like we started off with this new developer that joined that caused the he was late and then caused the whole problem to occur. It wasn't really the problem to be solved at all. If we stopped there and tried solving that by penalizing him or doing whatever we wanted to do to him, it wouldn't solve the problem again. It would cause the problem to recur again and again and again. So I think that's the problem that we need to address here. When people ask questions like, how do I scale? I like to really understand what is it that is happening, what's the context, and all that. And that's why I have the 5E scale engine. The 5E scale engine really understands things from a fundamental level, right? Is everything in place first before you can scale, right? Everything from the entrepreneur, the vision, the business model, the team, the customer journey, and any inefficiencies that the business operations has. Only after that, then can we really understand, the problems and preventing us to scale.
Now it makes a lot of sense, because I was reading your book itself. Then also there was one part where you were talking about we always ask ourselves not how do I solve this, but how do we solve it, right? That's how we gain leverage and how we get people solving a problem together. Now that makes a lot of sense together when you combine it with the why, because you got to understand the why it didn't work in the first place and then go about asking the how. Because I think too many people just jump into our problem, like what you said. People just go, how do we solve this? How do we solve this? Because people just want to put out the fire as soon as possible, right?
Yeah.
So they go, how do I solve this? How do we solve it? And then everyone all tries to come in and solve, and then realize that, wait, I thought we solved this a few months back. Why is the problem still there? Yeah, and I realized that encountered my business like a few times now that you mentioned about it. Like this whole thing just clicks, because sometimes I rush in too quick into like, okay, let's just solve the problem and then move on, because I'm very solution oriented. So then I realized that we didn't ask the why first before we go in the how. And even if we did ask the why, it was like a one layer of why, right? Instead of diving deeper, right? And so that make a lot of sense. Even though you also mentioned that in the book. See, this is exactly why you gotta read the book twice. Like his book is really filled with a ton of insights and strategies itself from his 17 years in Vodien itself. And so just want to ask the last few questions itself. I think this is really just based on leadership and bringing about and leading a team and culture and the customers as well. I think like there are three important components in the business itself, right? Like in terms of the leader, in terms of the team, and ultimately the customers itself, right? And what would you say, right, is the worst trait that a leader would have in a business itself, before we even talk about the best trait?
The worst trait that a leader would have in
a worst trait that a leader would have which will screw over the business by itself.
There are a few things that directly pertain to like company culture and all of that. And that is looking at meaning, mastery, and autonomy. If the leader has any traits that prevents these three things, the business is going to face a big problem, because nobody's going to want to stay in the company. Nobody's going to be wanting to perform in the business. Nobody's going to even enjoy themselves there. So I think as long as the entrepreneur, the leader has any trait that prevents this, they're going to face a big problem. Leaders who don't give credit, who steal credit, who prevent their employees from rising and from being promoted or from progressing, from being challenged at their work, all that will cause big problems down the road. That's how it's basically the alternate case, right? So I make sure that those things don't happen, and from there I try to create a company culture and a system of like management that prevents that. And that's how I create the cycle of good work, which is a company culture that is predicated on the three things that all employees want: meaning, mastery, and autonomy. Are there these three things that is ingrained in your company culture, such that everybody is able to understand the work that they are doing, able to own it, able to train others, and get every process documented, and at the end of the day, get recognition for everything that they do. So I think once you have that, you get a company culture that's really attractive, that's really nurturing, and allows people to really do their good work.
I think that's something I truly agree, because that's one of the first few things I talk about if someone comes in my team. Meaning is definitely very important, because you need to know the why before even going about talking about the what and the how. Right. One tricky thing for me, this is actually based on personal experience for the listeners out there. One tricky thing about for me is like in terms of autonomy. Now, I really fully believe in autonomy because I would love people to go out there to experiment, to get creative, and to really own their responsibility and really shine so that we can improve all together. It's not just me leading, but everyone is leading their own departments as well. And just based on my own personal experience, because some people won't be used to having the freedom of ownership and responsibility in the team, it's like, in a way, they are not really trained to think like, oh, okay, how do I improve it? I'm not sure if I'm getting this question correctly, but basically, like, there are some people who aren't really trained because all the while since young, they're always trained like, okay, let's follow. So all the while they're just following. And then now that they're placed in this position of autonomy where they go, you need the freedom of ownership to really raise the level. Like, how do we assimilate them in and then make sure that they actually fulfill or maximize that use of autonomy? Because to me, sometimes it's a little bit hard because I go like, okay, so you know what's your responsibility, right? Do you know what's your end in mind? So how I approach this, right, is I go, you know what's your responsibility, what's the end in mind for that? So I always start with the end in mind because vision is very important itself. And then sometimes like along the way, then they start to forget what the end in mind is because they're just not that used to it itself, even though I keep repeating again and again. So how would you, go about assimilating these people in and make sure they thrive in autonomy? Because I don't want to just cast it out as, oh, these people can't be leaders itself, right? Then that would just be me being a bad leader of not grooming other leaders.
Yeah. Well, you've really answered it. The process of grooming, it's not an overnight, a flip of the switch kind of thing. It's a progressive process, which is why, again, the three things are meaning, mastery, and autonomy. Mastery is a process that takes time. I don't want to say years, but I would say time. Take time. The idea is to break things down into smaller chunks, into smaller bite-sized pieces. Even autonomy, we can't just give autonomy around and like hope people like just embrace it and fully make use of it. We have to give like smaller bite-sized chunks. For example, if somebody new comes on board, we give them a small project first, right? And see if they can handle that. If they can, great. Give them a slightly bigger project. If they can't, we find out why. Find out whether it's a lack of information, whether it's maybe a lack of support, maybe it's them, they don't know how to do it, and then maybe it's the lack of training. So whatever it is, it allows them to progress. Same thing with autonomy. We give them autonomy, meaning that we give them the space in which they can perform, but we don't give them the whole farm. We give them a little like small area, and then they can like run around trying to complete their tasks. And the more important thing is not to micromanage. I think that's something that nobody enjoys. As a kid, I hated being like, having my parents or my teachers or anybody like breathing down my neck. I like to have the space, right? If you give me something to do, like homework or assignment, like give me a few days, right? Give me some time to do it. At the end of it, if I can't perform, if I can't do it, then let's review it and see how I can better do it next time, right? But in that space, if you tell me to do it, then just give me the time and space to actually complete the task. That's how you can assign autonomy or provide autonomy also. Once that's done, then you can start increasing that area that they are in, right? And so they get more and more autonomy doing the things that that everybody knows that they can do. And that just grows. Whether it's autonomy or mastery.
I think that really put in perspective, because I think maybe I'm not gonna say maybe, I definitely, because I gave them too big of, like what you say, that farm, like the farm analogy got to me, right? Like giving that too big of a farm, and then you go like, oh shit, now I'm gonna use a lot of time to go through this farm, rather than breaking down it into like smaller first before feeding them even more. So instead of pushing them to like a super high position, I didn't really like had that progressiveness, right, which has to do with mastery as well. Now that makes a lot of sense itself, and where I made that mistake itself. Now, interesting. So let's talk about more of the traits of leaders as well, because I think a lot of people would like to hear about what would you say is like your opinions in terms of like what best leadership traits and things like that. So what would you say are like the top 3 traits or values a leader will have?
Well, it's always based on the alternate case, right? So I like to have leaders that are communicative, they are transparent, that will give recognition freely, and are empathetic. I think those are traits that, that can help leaders a lot, because when you are managing others, it's really based on communication. It's really based on personnel development, and having all these traits, I think, really helps somebody progress as a leader.
It's very interesting you talk about like transparency, communication, empathy. It's a lot of centering around the word, like you say, it's communication. It's a lot of centering communication based on whether mistakes are made, or whether is it something screws up, or maybe something's done well as well, and then to give that recognition, because the whole company itself is very, very transparent. Now, for those that, because I do know some people, including me as well, actually, last time, I think some of us aren't that open to sharing like what kind of thoughts or emotions that we have as leaders. And people always talk about, in a company, you want to be vulnerable. I guess that's the word you say, like to really just share whatever it is that you have. Now, for these people who aren't very used to, aren't very used to sharing their feelings or the thoughts, and then like just portraying or to be vulnerable and to be radically transparent. That's probably the word, radically transparent. Then what would you say? What would you advise to these people, for those that find it a bit hard to open up?
Well, I don't think they need to be vulnerable or in that manner. Like, I think transparency, for me, what I mean is being clear on expectations and assumptions. I think clarity of expectations is something that really causes a lot of people to stumble. For example, and this happens everywhere. So, for example, if a newcomer comes on board and say joins our company, we have the expectation that they are of a certain standard. We have the expectation because we're kind of projecting what we are, all our experiences, our knowledge, our wisdom, our like whatever in us, to another person, right? But this person who joins us could be and usually is somebody that's actually a lot newer, and somebody who doesn't have the experience, and it's going to be a totally different person. And so there's bound to be conflict. This is where transparency comes in. This is where communication comes in. This is where you sit down and you actually talk about what expectations you have, what expectations the business has, and what expectations the other person has, the employee has, and try to see if there's a match. Once you find something that you can work on, even as something as simple as a project, then you can actually proceed without having like that much conflict or disagreement or disappointment, right? If you say, hey, okay, your first project is to maybe create a Instagram post every single day, and then you have this idea of an Instagram post and how it's supposed to look like with all the brand colors and all that, but the guy has zero clue, right? All that he hears is Instagram post, and he has to go figure it out on his own, right? The next day he's going to come out with an Instagram post, and I can guarantee you almost 100% of the time it's going to be completely different from what you expected. And then suddenly there's a disagreement. You think that guy is an idiot, and that process just completely flops. A much better way is to sit down and to actually talk about everything, right? What do you expect? What kind of tonality? What kind of any references that you have that kind of like showcase what you expect of an Instagram post. Once that's done, the next day something that comes out is more likely than not going to be something that's closer to what you expect. And I'm only raising Instagram posts because I know you're like really big on social media, but this is the same case for anything that we do in our work. Like literally anything. It could be from marketing to programming to designing to logistics, anything.
Yeah, and I think that's a very great point that you brought about, because I feel like I make that mistake as well of dropping a ton, not dropping expectation, but projecting a ton of expectations on someone when maybe like my SOPs or my processes aren't that clear yet. Then I realized that most of the time it actually still boils back down to me. Like in terms of maybe there are some processes that I didn't get clear of, like what you said, some of them weren't that transparent. That's why you said there's a need to be very, very, very transparent and very clear of what's needed. And maybe sometimes like, maybe the SOP, there was something wrong itself, and then maybe it was made by someone else and things like that. But I realized a lot of the problems in business actually just stems back to the leader. a lot, like what you say in the book, like the whole bottleneck itself is most likely us. right? And I find it very true because a lot of mistakes that our team makes or people that learn from us makes is most likely because of how we lead, because of how we go about in our daily life, about how we show up and every single thing that we do. That's why I talk about the whole identity. And now this really just kind of joins in the whole big picture together in this podcast itself. And just before I ask my last question, just want to ask how do people go about connecting and learning more from you? And maybe talk a little bit about where they can get the book from.
Speaking of the book, I got the book printed. It's now sitting in my living room, so I'm super excited. It's beautiful. Like, this is the first time I'm like touching it, right? After working on it for months, and it's gorgeous. Like, it's over 200 pages of printed, like on really like cream paper, and it's awesome, man. Like, it even has that glossy finish.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so this is the book that contains all my knowledge on scaling up. People have been asking me, how do I stop wasting my time? How do I work on my business instead of in my business? How do I attract, retain A players on my team? How do I acquire customers, retain customers, get them to renew, get them to refer? All these things are all stuff that I cover in the book. So I'm super excited about it. This can be found on my website, superscaling.com. Yeah, so that's the best place to connect with me as well. I'm also on social media, like huge on Instagram, Facebook. So everybody can find me there as well. Drop me a message to connect.
Yeah, we'll drop all the links below as well for you guys to go and visit and go and check out the amazing book. Once again, honest truth, I've read a lot of books like Scaling Up, Traction. I think you've heard this very common books, or I'll say the most fundamental books that others have written itself. And I think what Alvin has created is, like, I'll say the compilation of knowledge that I would have gotten from Traction, from Scaling Up, and from multiple scaling books, plus his own like additional magic touch when it comes to really talking about, I think very importantly, I think one thing you really cover up is a lot more of the thought processes that goes behind systems. And I think books like Traction, books like Scaling Up, they do talk a lot about mindset, because at the end of the day, like what we say, right? Most of the problems come from the bottleneck of the business, which is the leader. I think what you really gave is really a set of like how-tos in that sense, as well as like what to go about doing in order to solve that. And so then it becomes very, very practical, which I know you're a very practical person as well. And I thoroughly enjoyed it because I'm super practical as well. And I got a ton to implement after that. In fact, one of the first things that I can remember, I read it, I was like, oh shit, I have to stop using the word how do I, because a lot of times I tell my team itself, like, okay, one of the most common questions that we ask, in fact, this was like in our team sheet itself, and then I change it immediately, was always ask like, okay, how do I solve it? And then if if you don't know how to solve it, then go and ask someone else. Then I was thinking, oh wait, instead of how do I solve it, why not just straight away ask how do we solve it? Then I don't have to have another layer of communication itself. So honest truth, it really saves you a lot of time on this kind of small mistakes, because if I were to add up all the mistakes made, right, I would save a crap ton of time, like maybe a few hours every single week if I just optimize everything all at one go, right? So once again, all the links are in the down below, in whether is it if you're watching YouTube or whether is it podcast, it's the links, they will be there. Okay, so just want to ask the last question to Alvin that is always pertaining to the title of the whole podcast show, which is, how do you define influence? How do you define influence?
Oh, wow. I think influence basically talks about the difference that you can make to others. Influence being influencing people's decisions, their thoughts, their opinions. And therefore, there's a lot of power in that, because it can either sway positively or negatively. Yeah, I guess that's my definition of.
Once again, very practical, very practical definition of what influence is. And just one last question itself is, what would you say to people that will allow them to massively increase their influence to the people around them itself?
I think they've got to be a lighthouse, a projector of whatever values, whatever vision they have. And that means they have to be absolutely clear about what those things are before you can even amplify them. So it all starts from within. I honestly believe that everything that we do stems from like our thoughts, our mindsets, what drives us, our innate intrinsic motivations. Once we get a super clear idea of what that is, then we can go project whatever we want out in the world. And hopefully that's a positive thing.
Awesome, man. Really love those last words over there. So with that, guys, do remember to go and subscribe to this podcast if you haven't, or subscribe to YouTube if you're listening to this on YouTube. Right, leave a like button. And once again, please go and follow Alvin or follow me as well. I think ultimately go and follow Alvin because he's got a ton of strategies out there to offer you. So with that, keep staying real, guys, and keep leading.